Welcome to Epic Mom Life. I am your host, Kara Peterson. This show is sponsored by The Possum's Tale, a unique book adventure for your 6 to 12-year-old child. Let's jump into today's show. Hi, so this week I have 5 tips to inspire a love for poetry in your homeschool setting. There are many benefits to teaching children poetry, and I covered all of this last week. But briefly, it improves language skills, memory retention, enhancing creativity, exploring social emotion skills, developing empathy for others, encouraging a growth mindset, and promoting critical thinking skills. Poetry is fabulous. However, poetry is different from the written structure children are accustomed to and usually taught day to day. Many adults have had a less than exciting experience with poetry and have to overcome their own resistance to it if they are going to bring poetry to the homeschool classroom. I love poetry and I enjoy teaching it to my middle school students. So I am going to give you 5 tips for creating a fun and exciting poetry unit. 1, variety. What would life be like if you had pizza for dinner every single night? Even if pizza is your very favorite food, it would kind of get boring after a very short while. There are so many different types of poetry, and these many types span all different genres. You can find funny, historical, sad, serious, political, descriptive, and thought-provoking poems. If your child loves, you fill in the blank, you can find a poem about that. The way poets find to express their emotions or thoughts about these topics are numerous. I just chose 10. You will notice I left out the poem that it seems like every single kindergarten or first grade teacher has their class do, the autobiography poem. So you see, there are so many choices. I'm going to breeze through these, but remember you can go to my website to see them all written out. Free verse. Believe it or not, this type of poem is actually one of the hardest, for me anyway, to write. It has no rules, follows no structure, rhyme scheme, or number of lines or guidelines. Sometimes the words come easier to me because I have a structure to follow. Limerick. These are almost always funny. They are a 5-line poem with a specific rhyme scheme. Haiku. This is a traditional Japanese poem of 3 lines with a syllable count of 575, most often about nature. Acrostic, a poem where the first word in each line spells a word or phrase vertically that the poem is about. This was also a poem commonly done when you were young in school, where you did your name down like Kara, and then you did kind, awesome, and you did words off of that like that. Concrete. This is my absolute favorite poem, and it's not a poem that's talked about very often. It's a poem that forms a picture. So the words form a picture. It can be super, super simple in that the words can just repeat themselves. So let's just think of an elephant. So you can have an elephant, and where the ear is, you can just go ear, 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 ear. And you can do that in one color or an outline. And then inside it, you can have gray, and then the outline, you can have black. Or you can make it a little bit more difficult, where the child comes up with words that embody characteristics of the image they are creating. So I don't know a whole lot about elephants, so you'd want to come up with a whole lot more because, it's a big image, right? But like you can do memory or sociable. So that's above ear, ear, eye, tusk, tusk, right? But now you have concepts that go towards that image. Then my favorite, and this is the one that I've done a couple of these, is that you create a poem that is free verse, but it's in the shape of the object that the poem is about. So if it was about the elephant, it would be in the shape of an elephant. So it actually may be a poem all about how the elephants are being hunted and it's sad or something like that. And you may not even say it's an elephant, but you're talking about the horrors that are happening, and then you see the elephant, and it has a profound effect. I love these. So I usually don't go on and on, but seriously, these are my favorite. Cinquain, a 5-line poem that follows a specific syllable pattern, 2, 4, 6, 8, 2. Diamante. This is a great option when you're working on grammar. This poem ends up kind of looking like a diamond.
The lines go as follows. Number 1, one noun. Number 2, two adjectives. The two adjectives are describing line 1. Number 3, three ing action words describing line 1. Number 4, two nouns describing line 1 and two nouns describing line 7. Number 5, three ing action words describing line 7. Number 6, two adjectives describing line 7. And number 7, one noun that is the opposite of the noun in line 1. So it's kind of fun. Onomatopoeia. These do not have a set rhyme pattern or structure or anything like that. However, you're using a sound and you're following that sound or how that sound is used through the poem, like zoom or bonk or those kind of swish. Like swish could be a fun basketball poem, right? Those kind of things. Nanette. This is the one I talked about last week. I have recently really fallen in love with this one for the expression of big emotions in little bodies. It is a 10-line poem. Each line has one more syllable than the previous line, and it starts with 9 syllables in the first line. I said that slow because it was kind of hard to follow. The 10th line only has a 1 syllable. Epic. This is a lengthy narrative poem about a hero. Now, Casey at Bat is a ballad, but it's structured like a mini epic. So when I teach epics to young people, I love to look at this one. So these poems are fairly quick to write other than the epic, and you can find examples for most of them on the internet. As an aside, I've done lesson plans and my entire 5th grade unit is a poetry unit. I didn't go into a huge detail, but everything I've done is about poetry and figurative language and all kinds of stuff. It was a lot of fun for me. So there's a link to that. I recommend writing one together. So you and your child write one of these poems together. So you're modeling it. And that way, because your child sometimes can be intimidated by the idea of writing poetry at first, but that way they can see how much fun this can be. Then you allow your child to create the poem on their own. I also recommend you only explore one type of poem a day. It can be kind of overwhelming if you're doing like the Diamante and then the Nanette and then the Limerick all together. That's a lot to kind of absorb. You want them to be able to be creative. Tip number 2. While studying poetry, it is a great time to teach figurative language and terms. Here is a list of the most common terms your child will come across and should know. And remember, vocabulary by itself is really boring. Teach the devices when they come up in the example poems. Poetic structure. Line. A line is a set of words that begins and ends for a specific reason in a poem. It's very much like a sentence, although it does not have punctuation or grammar requirements. Meter or rhythm, a pattern of stressed or unstressed syllables and the number of syllables. While this sounds really complicated, you notice this simply by the way the words sound. So songs are a type of poetry, and they usually pay a lot of attention to the meter and the rhythm. Also, many children's books. Couplet, a pair of consecutive lines in a poem that typically rhyme and have meter. Stanza, a group of lines in a poem that are separated from other groups of lines to create structure, organization, or convey meaning. So the stanza almost looks like a baby paragraph, right? Only it doesn't have the punctuation. Rhyme scheme, the pattern of rhymes at the end of each line of the poem. That's where you see things like ABBA or ABAB or ABBC, something like that. Figurative language, simile, a comparison between two unlike things using like or as. Metaphor, a comparison between two unlike things without using like or as. Hyperbole. A hyperbole is a huge, enormous exaggeration for emphasis or effect, like I was so hungry I could eat a horse. Imagery, language that appeals to the senses. Personification, this is giving human qualities to non-human things. Alliteration. Okay, now I'm going to slow down because some of these people don't really know. Alliteration with an A is the repetition of initial consonant sounds. An example, Sharon shoveled sherbet from the deck of her ship. That's 4 sh assonants. The repetition of vowel sounds. Example, I use a night light to make the dark bright. That's 4 long I's. So even though you had night, light, bright, you also had I at the very beginning. Consonants, the repetition of consonant sounds written at the end, consonant sounds that are written or that are written at the end of the words. Example, Parker likes to ride his trike. 3 sounds. Parker likes trike. Tip number 3, explore. What is your child's favorite subject to read? What types of books do they enjoy reading or having read to them? Try to find poems that meet both of these favorites, subject and type. My youngest loved funny books and he loved cars. Steer your child to age and interest appropriate poetry books in the library. Then let them choose a favorite. Have them write it down. Oh, yep. Copy it down the old-fashioned way. Write it down. Give them time to stew on it for a while. What are their overall thoughts and emotions about the poem? What do they like about it? What do they think the author was expressing, or do they think that was having them feel? By what words were they using in there so that they would feel a certain way? This form of analysis helps your child to develop critical thinking skills. It's also fun because there's no wrong answer. You cannot possibly know what the author intended, but as long as your child has a reason for answers to these questions, they are right. Like if they're reading a question or a poem and it has words like bubbly and fun and sunshine, all of those are upbeat. So I would assume that the author wanted me to feel positive about the world. In Rhymes and Reasons, the many benefits of poetry for kids, we learned that poetry can help with memory retention, but you actually have to practice memorizing the poems. Your child has the poem written down. So if you want them to also work on their memory retention, you can have them do that as well. Tip number 4, interactive. Poetry can seem like a very staid and calm experience, but have you ever been to a poetry slam? It is very expressive and engaging. Organize events where your child can share their own poetry. This encourages your child to create and helps learn skills for speaking confidently in front of others. Ideas include TikTok video, poetry slam, library or bookstore, poetry open mic night, and family gatherings. And finally, tip number 5, media. I love the written word almost always more than the movie version. I actually just watched Shard Lake on Hulu and then happened to find Dissolution by C.J. Sanson on audiobook. I had no idea they were the same thing. The book is so much better than the television series, but I digress. Poetry, in its lovely, figurative, and free form, can sometimes be difficult for children to understand. There are poems that are put into short clips online. Even Shakespeare, which can be hard for adults to understand, has been made into modern versions, and there's films, all kinds of stuff. Many children's stories are types of poetry. The Possum's Tale, which I wrote, is done in rhyming couplets with specific meter. And as I mentioned, the songs are poetic. You can teach poetic devices and language often by looking at your children's favorite songs and lyrics and children's stories. Kids like puzzles and figuring out what is there but isn't obvious. Think of all the hidden images or I spot games they loved when they were younger. It becomes much more fun and children become much more engaged. The kids' movie quote, we read poetry, we read poetry, and the principal blew up. Lavender in Matilda.
If you are hearing this message, you've listened to the entire episode, and for that, I want to send you a huge thank you. Please leave me a comment or review and share with other moms you know. Get in touch in the comments or on Kara's social media networks. See you next week for a new episode.